Welcome to Small Spark Theory. This podcast is designed as a collection of thoughts, ideas, and practical tips on using marginal gains to help your agency new business endeavours. Small Spark Theory is created and hosted by me, Lucy Mann of Gunpowder Consulting. Hello and welcome back to Small Spark Theory. We have another transatlantic interview for your listening pleasure today. And in honour of our guest, because we're not in the pod, we've actually bought a new microphone. We've got our very own Small Spark Theory microphone, which is brilliant. Although I have to say, I haven't actually spent enough time learning how to use it. So I can tell you right now that the sound on this particular episode isn't going to be up to the usual production values that we enjoy in the pod. But I'd say bear with us. I think it's going to be worth it because we have a fantastic guest joining us to talk on the subject of pricing. Now, you may have come across the Win Without Pitching Manifesto from Blair Enns, and certainly if you're a DBA member, you may be aware that Blair launched a new book at the beginning of this year on pricing, and specifically pricing creativity. So I'm delighted to welcome Blair Enns. Blair, welcome to Small Spark Theory.
Thank you.
We're really pleased to have you on board. We've referenced you and your work numerous times over the course of the series. And in fact, listeners will know that our February episode, which was on positioning, was with your longtime collaborator, David C. Baker.
Never heard of him.
Yeah, who's that chancer? But for those listeners who haven't come across you or your work before, it would be really helpful just to give us a little bit of background on Win Without Pitching and how you came to write this new book on pricing creativity, which I have to say, the byline, A Guide to Profit Beyond the Billable Hour, is as motivating as you can possibly get. Because I think of all the conversations that I have with agency owners, understanding how they can leverage profit beyond the billable hour is the dream. So I like what you did there with the title.
Thank you. I had the subtitle or secondary title there for a long time, for a few years, because it took me years to write this book. That's another story. But originally it was going to be called Pricing Design. I like the double entendre of pricing design, designing pricing and pricing for the design world. And then I was at a conference and I met a wonderful young man named Dan Mall, who's the founder of a company called Super Friendly, and he does a lot of kind of professional development for designers. And he said, "Oh yeah, I just published my new book, Pricing Design." And I bore holes in his head with my eyes, and then I went back and renamed it Pricing Creativity, but I kept the subtitle. So I'm the founder and CEO of Win Without Pitching. It is a new business or sales. We use the S word internally, but not so much externally. It's a new business development training program for creative professionals. It's been that way for about 5 years, since the beginning of 2013. Previous to that, for more than a decade, Win Without Pitching was a solo new business consulting practice. And I ran that, and a few things happened in 2012 that forced me to shift the business from a consulting practice to a training company. And it's been an interesting journey because those are two different things, completely different things, being a consultant versus building a business with staff and culture. But that's what I do. I help, my team and I help creative professionals to win more business at higher prices and lower cost of sale. And we deliver that mostly through remote training, but also some on-site training.
Okay. Now, you very kindly sent me a copy of the book last week, which I have been speed reading over the weekend. Now, I wanted to get as much information in before we had this conversation today, but I know already that I'm going to go back and read it again and again. It's a fascinating book. And before we go into the detail, because there's a lot to take on board in this approach to pricing creativity, one of the things that really struck me first is that this series, Small Spark Theory, the premise of this has been about marginal gains. It's been about the small changes that agency founders or new business practitioners can make to get a better overall result. This approach to pricing is not a small change. It's a mindset shift, quite a big mindset shift. And the application of the theory takes a lot of practice and is going to take some time to get right for people to be able to see the effects of this shift in the way that they think about pricing creativity. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree with that at the highest level, but I also think there are levels or layers here in the advice in the book, and I think there's some things that people can do immediately and quite easily to get some instant gains. And I think, talk about small gains. I think pricing, you're changing your pricing strategy is one of the I can't think of any area where you can get a bigger return on your investment. I think most pricing theorists would agree that you want to make more money, start with your pricing strategy. So I think there's some things in the book, and we'll get into some of the principles and rules, I'm sure. But some are just so easy, you can start doing them now, and you'll start making more money instantly. But that next level, there is kind of a higher level that ultimately, realistically, I don't expect that the majority of readers will get to what I consider the ultimate level of pricing and income. But I expect the vast majority to be able to apply kind of the simple rules and principles and start making significantly more money. And then there's a whole level beyond that. That's where when you truly master the value conversation, the big shift is the focus goes from you and what you might sell and how many hours this might take you to completely turn it around and be completely focused on the client and the value you might create for the client. And you get 3/4 of the way through the entire sale without even thinking about what you might do. That is a fundamental mindset shift. And when that shift happens, now you have access to the highest level of earning that is like multiples of what your competitors would be earning. So I would agree with you in part in that it is a fundamental mindset shift, but there's so much profit to be gained just by applying some of the simple rules.
Okay, so give us an example of one of the simple rules where people can really start seeing some tangible difference.
So the book is broken into 4 sections. It's the principles, where I've taken, all of the economic theory and pricing theory that I had to absorb to be able to write this book, and I distill it down into as few principles as possible. So in the principles, I say just understand these. And then there are 6 rules of pricing creativity, and the rules are things that you do every time. And then the biggest section of the book is called tips, and tips is really specific situation guidance. So if you're in this situation, you might want to flip to this part of this chapter in the tip section. There's a chapter on retainers. There's a chapter on final negotiations. There's a chapter on even more crazy alternative pricing models. There's a chapter on, there's 3 chapters on how to assemble your proposals. So that's the tip section. And then if you buy the manual version, and it's available in 3 different versions, we should talk about that too. If you buy the manual version, and I wrote this kind of thinking of it as a manual, then there's also a tools section where you would flip to and use the templates and the checklists, etc. So you ask for some simple guidance. So let's take the first 2 rules. The first one is price the client, not the job. And the second one is offer options. So the first rule is rooted in the principle of the subjective theory of value, the idea that value, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholders. Different people value different things differently and at different times. So what that means is if somebody says to you, hey, do you do X, like identity design as an example, and you say, yeah, we do X, and they say, well, what do you charge for X? You shouldn't answer that. You should not have an answer for that, because what you charge for X, if somebody says, oh, identity design, we charge between 10,000 and 20,000 pounds as an example, or websites or campaigns of various kinds. If you answer that question, even with a range, your ability to actually provide an answer in that situation means that you're calculating costs and you're pricing based on your cost. And we really want to get you to this place where there are 3 things you can sell and your clients can buy from you. You can sell your costs or your inputs of time and materials. You can sell your outputs of campaigns or websites or other designed materials. Or you can sell on value. You can sell the future value that you might create for the client. So if you answer that question, we charge, your logos are 10 to 20 grand, depending on certain variables, you're making calculations on costs. You shouldn't be able to answer that, because a logo for your neighbor's small business that she's starting out of her home versus a redesign of the Financial Times identity, those should be priced significantly differently, and the price should not be based on the inputs of hours. The price should be based on the value to the client. And there's a chapter in the book where we talk about the difference between what Nike paid for their logo and what Pepsi paid for a logo redesign years later. And it's many, many, many orders of magnitude difference. And we just dive into, what's the source of the difference. And it's not time, it's the value. And there are different ways you can kind of compute value. So the first rule, and it's pretty simple, is just remember, price the client, not the job. So don't throw out a price or even a range when somebody says, hey, what do you charge for X? The answer is it depends. And what it depends on is not your input of time and materials, but the value you might create for the client. So just don't get locked in to a set price. The second rule, and probably this is the easiest one, if everybody just takes one rule away from today, I would say it's the second rule of pricing creativity, which is offer options. So you're in the typical creative firm of any kind, client asks for a proposal, we put forward a proposal, and it is what I term a take it or leave it proposal. And it's take it or leave it because you make your assessment about all kinds of things, what it is that the client really wants, how much they really want to spend, and in particular, how much risk they're willing to take in the engagement and how much risk they want you to make go away. And then you put a price on it. And so it becomes this binary decision where you say to your client, we can do this, you can hire us to do this, or you cannot hire us to do this. And there's an implication that we could negotiate around it. But when you do that, when you offer this take it or leave it proposal, you're asking the client to answer a question their brain isn't wired to answer in isolation. They cannot look at your proposal and go, this is worth £50,000. They have to make a comparison. And we prove that in the book through this very wonderful optical illusion by cognitive scientist Edward Adelson. And I won't give it away here, but you have to see it in the book. And the first time I saw that image, that's when the sky cracked open for me. And I realized that all value is subjective.
I'd seen that one before, actually, and I'd forgotten about that, but I hadn't thought about it in this context. So it was really interesting to see it in this context. And you think, of course.
Yeah. So your client's brain isn't wired to be able to properly answer the question that you're posing when you put forward a take it or leave it proposal. You're asking them to determine, is this worth £50,000? They have to make a comparison. They can only compare. So you're forcing them to go away and get quotes from other competitors. You're forcing them to make comparisons about what else they might get for £50,000. And when you put forward an option with a proposal with multiple options, and let's just say three is better than two. You can use four, but when I'm talking about them, I usually just talk about three options. So when you put forward a proposal with three different options, three different ways you might help at three different price points, you can see the client's brain going to work trying to solve the problem that it's actually wired to solve, which is answer the question, which of these is the best value? So you change the question, it changes the dynamics of the relationship. And if you apply a couple of other techniques, and you're more likely to get a positive outcome. And if you apply a couple of more of the rules and principles, then the likelihood of you earning significantly more money just based on putting forward three options, it's just like you just can't help but earn more.
And I particularly liked your example of anchoring. So you introduced the concept of anchoring prices with your example of the Prada store. I think it was in Whistler. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'll tell that story. The first time, probably the only time I've walked into a Prada store. I am not in their target market, and my wife's not in their target market, but I was killing time in the village of Whistler, this ski village in British Columbia. I'm based in BC. So I was killing time waiting for some friends, and I thought, a Prada store, I'll walk in and see what all the fuss is about. And this is 10 or 15 years ago. And the very first item I encountered, which was kind of front and center in the store, was just a simple black t-shirt with nothing on it, just a simple black t-shirt on a mannequin. And I thought, well, that would look nice on my wife. Maybe I'll buy her a gift. And I turned over the price tag, and my brain could not compute the price that it was seeing. It was $500. Now, I've since seen many $500 t-shirts, but at the time, I don't know that I'd seen one in 3 digits, let alone 500. So it took me a while to compute what I was seeing, and then I turned around and I walked out. But what I didn't realize in that moment is that almost all luxury goods retailers do this. And the job of that $500 price tag is not to sell that $500 t-shirt. It's to make the $295 t-shirts look affordable. So they anchor high. Now, if you go into a clothing store and you say, I'm looking for a coat and my price range is, up to 300 pounds, and here's my size, I'm looking for a coat of this description. What the salesperson will do is they will put the 3,000 pound coat on you, and they'll say, okay, well, let's just try this one on for size. And then they put it on you, and they leave you alone with it for a moment while they go and source what it is that you've asked for. They don't actually source what you've asked for. They source something that's probably twice as high as your stated budget range. And you're looking in the mirror thinking, wow, I look great in this coat. And you look at the price tag, and it's not 300 pounds, it's 3,000 pounds. What they're doing is they're anchoring high, and they're setting themselves up so when they come back with the 600-pound coat, it's a relief. It's far better than the 3,000-pound coat. Now, a friend of mine, I write a story about him in the book. He's been telling me about his adventures in his own pricing journey, and he wrote an article recently that he sent me where he said he had a client with a $30,000 budget. He went in and he anchored high. So when anchoring, we're talking about beginning with a really high number, and the job of that anchor is to make the other options look less expensive. So he went in with a $30 million proposal, and he set it up, and he said, listen, I know what your budget is, but we've done some exploration work around this, and we've got some really big ideas, big numbers, but I think it would be irresponsible of us to not share this with you. So I'm going to share a $30 million solution with you. And then he walked them through the solution. They didn't buy the $30 million solution, but they bought the $300,000 solution, which was the second option. And the stated budget was $30,000.
So it's 10 times, yeah.
10 times by anchoring against something that was 100 or was 1,000 times higher than the budget.
And to me, the thing that struck me about that theory is that we talk a lot, I'm sure you're the same, a lot of the conversations that I have with agencies is having this budget conversation. And I hear this a lot when I'm working with agencies, and they say, how do we get the client to talk about budget? And we ask, and you end up in this sort of cloak and dagger standoff where nobody kind of wants to mention money. But the anchoring high is a really good way, and early in the conversation being able to flush out those kind of budgetary conversations.
Yeah, and so the science of anchoring, this is Nobel Prize winning science. Daniel Kahneman won a Nobel Prize for this. I might be confused. Maybe he won it for something else. But it's been proven in so many studies, and it's such a powerful effect that you can't even undo it when you know it's being done to you. But the idea is that the first piece of information on a subject skews the ultimate decision that you make. So the full name of it is anchoring and adjusting. So what we do, and Kahneman in his book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, talked about this 2 systems of thinking. So system 1 is this very cognitively efficient system that kind of jumps to conclusions based on the first piece of information. Say you and I are talking about you hiring me on a consulting basis, and you've got a budget range that you're thinking, and I just kind of drop a number that's 10 times what you're thinking or higher than what you're thinking, then you immediately start to, your thinking kind of skews to that. You have this reaction, oh my God, that's so much money. And then your system 2, which is the more cognitively kind of expensive system, but it's the reasoning system. It kind of reasons away from the conclusion that's jumped to. So you kind of jump to this conclusion based on the first piece of information. That's why I want to speak about money first, and I want to put a high number on the table. And then you jump to this conclusion, and then system 2 kind of reasons back towards what you were thinking originally. But what all the science shows is moving back towards the place where you were kind of thinking originally, you never fully compensate for that anchor. We kind of stop at this threshold of an area, and we never go back to the original place where we were thinking, if that makes sense. So I used to teach that in negotiating, he who speaks first loses, but that's exactly wrong. So when you're in a situation where the client is not, and I know your clients and my clients would experience the same thing, and I'm sure we've had the same conversations where the agency folks are frustrated because the client won't put a number on the table. That's a good thing, because you can put a number on the table and you can make that number really high. And then, so when you deliver a high anchor, even if before you're delivering a proposal, if you're just having a conversation and you're trying to get a sense of the range and you're trying to help them set a budget, just put a really high number on the table and then say nothing. Because in the kind of the spirit of small spark theory, and if you think of the little gains, I always say, I think the smallest thing that you can do to become a better salesperson is to be the party in the conversation that is most comfortable with silence. So you drop this really high number, or you deliver an objection of some kind, like we don't typically respond to RFPs. That's a common one that we like to have our clients say. And then you say nothing. If you let the client speak next, you're going to get so much information in whatever you hear next. And you have to remind yourself, it's just data. And the first time you do this, you'll be really nervous, but it's so easy to get good at. You don't have to be comfortable with silence. You just have to be more comfortable than the other party. And that's really easy to do because very few people work on that. So just with a couple of practice tries, you get really comfortable just stating a high number and then waiting and seeing what the client says next. Because if I say to you, oh, I think, on the high end, you might want to start thinking about budgeting around £1 million for this, Lucy, at least on the high end. Silence. And you go, and I hear from, oh my Lord, there's no way we'll budget. There's no way we can get £1 million. So that begs the question, well, what do you think you could do on the high end? Maybe $500,000. Okay. All right. So now I'm helping you set a range, and the anchor, and maybe originally you were thinking $250,000, and now you're thinking, well, $250,000. I want to be at $250,000. Maybe we could go to $500,000. And that's how the conversation goes. And you don't get that information unless you anchor high and then just be comfortable with the silence that comes after.
A couple of things strike me about this. The first thing is that this relies on you having conversations with clients that isn't really part of a kind of beauty parade pitch scenario. So my recommendation is that before somebody invests in your book, Pricing Creativity, they actually go back and read the Win Without Pitching Manifesto, because that's a mindset to get into and a way to think of bringing on new clients and building relationships with new clients, which then would make it easier to start. It sets the right tone for being able to have these conversations. Because if you're having these kind of conversations with clients when they're already at the point where they've got a particular brief and they're talking to a number of agencies, you have less room to maneuver in these conversations, would you say? Whereas if you're having the conversations with the client earlier on and you're having a more strategic conversation, then that gives you a little bit more space.
Yeah, I think getting to the second level of pricing success for sure, or the highest level, really requires, I said it requires a mindset shift. That mindset shift is not going to happen unless you start thinking of yourself, like seriously believing in yourself and your firm as the expert, and you start selling from the expert practitioner position rather than the vendor position. If you see yourself as a vendor, if you see yourself with little ability to affect the buying process or the final price, then the client will see it. If you see it yourself as the expert practitioner and you see yourself and your firm as the prize to be won in the relationship, even if the client does not in the beginning, then at least you have a chance. One of those points of view will dominate by the end. And the idea is, and there's a fantastic book called Pitch Anything, and I know I'm the Win Without Pitching guy, but it's about pitching in the money business. It's by Oren Klaff, and he talks about this idea of frame control. So it's a great term that he uses. So the frame is the point of view that you bring to the interaction. And he says that in every social interaction, people bring their own frame, their own point of view. So what we're talking about here is the simple frame of you are either the expert practitioner or you are the vendor. You see yourself through one of those frames. Likewise, so does the client. You are either the expert practitioner or you are the vendor. And if you see yourself as the expert practitioner at the beginning of the interaction and the client sees you as the vendor at the beginning of the interaction, at the end of the interaction, one of those will dominate. And what Klaff likes to say is, frames don't play nice, they collide. One destroys the other and one dominates. And he describes it as this kind of violent thing. It's not violent, but I like the idea of it, that in the end, one frame prevails and you both buy into it. So at the end of the interaction, you both agree that you are the expert. And if you are the expert, then you will be allowed to lead somewhat or to affect the buying process, to extract some behavioral concessions. Or you're not. You're the vendor and you will play by the rules, and you are seen to have numerous direct competitors, and therefore you have no power in the relationship. So I think that's good advice, that you go back and read the manifesto first. And the manifesto is the Yes You Can book. That will get you inspired you'll start thinking of yourself and your firm differently. You'll start to occupy that higher ground in the relationship, at least in your mind at first, and then that will translate to the client. And then pricing changes after that will become more possible.
My other observation is that in reading the book and listening to you again talking about this approach, it reminds me about my original sales training. So I came to new business having, back in the late 80s, early 90s, trained in selling advertising space over the phone. So I had the kind of old school sales training and came to agency new business from that perspective. And it occurs to me how little genuine sales training I experience when I'm working with agencies, how little any of the senior people have been trained or are investing in really robust sales and negotiation training. And again, what a massive difference that can make.
So if I think back to my early advertising career, in my first agency job, I was an account coordinator originally, and then an account executive, and moved up through the account side. And I think David Ogilvy describes this scene that I played out in my career. He describes it in his book, Ogilvy on Advertising. He's overhearing a conversation. I think it's on a plane. One guy says to the guy next to him, "What do you do?" "I'm in advertising." "Oh, you make the ads?" No, I'm in account management." "Oh, you're in sales?" No, I'm not in sales. Well, what do you do?" "Well, I kind of deal with the clients and blah, blah, blah." "So that sounds like sales." No, I can assure you it's not sales. And I've had the same conversations. And that's why we do sales training for creative professionals. And we internally use that term a lot. When we're sending messages to the world, we try not to use the S word because it's still seen as a dirty word. I saw it as a dirty word for the longest time. I saw it as talking people into things. I now understand that it's not as in your role of selling the services of your firm. You have no business talking anybody into anything ever. It's not your job to convince people. It's your job to facilitate a choice. I think the perfect model, scientific model for buying is changing. So selling is change management, and you see yourself as a facilitator of change, and you take seriously the responsibility to only help people. Therefore, you wouldn't sell them something that isn't appropriate for them. You're helping facilitate this choice where you're taking them to a better place. Like no matter what you sell, you are selling to your customer a better version of themselves, a desired future state of some form. So if you see yourself as a facilitator of that, if you don't see it as your job to talk people into things, then you will embrace the idea of the nobility of sales. And if you don't agree with those concepts, you're probably going to see it as this dirty thing. Therefore, you're not going to invest in training. Like when we send an email that has the S word in the subject line, the open rate plummets. We can use it in the body of the email, of the article, but we just no longer put it into the subject line because people are repulsed by the word. But I agree with you. When I went through sales training, the only time in my agency career, that's when I decided to launch Win Without Pitching, because I realized there's nobody I had never encountered anybody in my agency career that had been through proper sales training. Now, I imagine some of my clients or some creative professionals that I know sitting through what I would consider to be classic sales training. There's just no way they're going to survive that. It's just going to, different closing techniques, all these things that are sometimes contrived. Our expertise at Win Without Pitching is not in selling per se. It's understanding the peculiarities of the creative personality that makes selling difficult. So if somebody, we tend to train people who don't primarily see themselves as salespeople. Those who do see themselves as salespeople and they want better training, they tend to go to the more the spin selling, the Sandler Sales Institute, etc.
They're largely, certainly in my experience, working with a lot of creative people, usually founders that are creative people rather than have come up through the client service side, and largely introverts, so they can talk at length about the font or the kerning and get very passionate about that. But when it actually comes to selling themselves or selling the idea, and certainly when you put them face to face with a procurement team of a large kind of multinational, then suddenly everything goes south. And I feel for them because if you're going to get caught up in pricing in a roster negotiation, then you're going to be stuck with that hourly rate for 2 years on a contract. Then you're just going to be miserable.
So let's just paint the picture. We have, let's say it's somebody who owns a creative firm who was a creative person herself originally, and she is now finding herself negotiating. So what she's selling is highly personal, right? It's the contents of her heads, her creation, and that of her team. So it's highly personal. So any rejection is highly personal. So she's very invested in this, number one. Number two, she's untrained. And number three, she's not working from a place of policies and procedures where she's not able to say, it's our policy that we don't do this, or it's our policy that you must do this. And she is negotiating against a party who, in procurement for sure, is number one, not emotionally invested. Number two, is highly trained. And number three, is working from a place of policies and preferences. They are going to win all day long.
So, in short, everybody needs to buy the book. Since I finished reading this on Sunday evening, and then I went back and listened to your conversation on Two Bobs with David, I then saw 2 clients yesterday and told both of them, I was slightly evangelical, I have to say, told both of them, just go back. And they said, we've already looked at it, it's quite expensive. And I said, no, just do it. Honestly, just do it. And I like what you've done with the pricing of this book and the fact that there's a money-back guarantee.
One of our key values at Win Without Pitching is do what we say. So I'm writing this book and I realized It's essentially self-published. Ostensibly, it's published by Rockbench, which is David Baker's publishing company, and that published my first book. But it's only available on our website, so you go to pricingcreativity.com. But it is the first pricing book in the world that is priced based on the principles in the book. So there are 3 options with a high anchor. And interestingly, we're running some pricing experiments as we tweak some things, and we're going to publish those in the next few months. Let's see, more than 1/3 of the people buy the high anchor. So there's 3 different prices, 3 different formats, $100, $199, and $320. Well, the $320 option is there to make the $199 option look more affordable. But clearly price isn't high enough where we're delivering too much value in the third option, because it is the number one choice is the high anchor option. So so it's expensive for a book. If you think of it as a book, it's expensive, but it is fully guaranteed, as you point out. So if at any point somebody buys it and they don't make more money, or they, for whatever reason, they're unhappy with it, they can send it back. We've sold almost exactly 1,000 copies at this recording at an average price of $235, and we've had no returns yet. I expect we'll get some. But I think if you can't make more money from this book, a significant amount of more money, if you've got opportunities, proposals that you're pricing, and you can't make more money, something's wrong, and it's not me, it's you. It's operator error. How arrogant is that?
I've got a couple of things I just want to run through with you before you go. We've asked everybody that's come along to Small Spark Theory what piece of advice they've been given in their career that's really stuck with them, that they've kind of come back to again and again. I wonder what advice you've been given.
The best life advice that I've ever been given was by a lawyer who said, never break more than one law at a time.
Okay.
So if you have a body in the trunk or the boot of the car, then stop and fix the burned out headlight.
Wow, that's not what I was expecting.
Yeah, that lawyer went to jail for tax evasion. But that's advice I give my kids. In the business, I've received so much good advice. I can't, if I could pass on good advice to kind of aspiring entrepreneurs, that's at the root of business success, I would say marry well.
Okay.
A friend of mine pointed this out to me a while ago. To one of her kids was kind of making an observation about what he perceived as my success, and she said, "Well, you can see it's obvious. It's look at who he married." And I never thought of it that way, but that was a few years ago, and I've thought about it a lot since. And my wife is also my business partner, and that's not a requirement. But we work very well together. We divide responsibilities along the different lines. In building a business, I've had just the complete support of somebody who loves me unconditionally, but has been very supportive of like what it takes to build a business, of an entrepreneurial life. And I would say choose your partners wisely, your business partners, your life partners. It makes everything so much easier.
Okay, you heard it here first, people. Go out there, marry well. Good.
Not what you were expecting to hear on this podcast today, were you?
Not at all. And I'd like everybody just to come back and tell us how that goes. We'll revisit this next year and see how that's gone. The other thing we need to ask you is, we give away a copy of a book with every episode. Now, I'm not going to give away a copy of your book because, frankly, I can't afford to do that.
No, I will give you a copy of Pricing Creativity, the manual and the ebook. Well, let's do the whole thing: the manual, the ebook, and the 5 videos that go with it. So $320 US value, and you just let us know who the winner is, and we'll send it all to them.
Oh, that's amazing. That's fantastic. Well, listeners, you know how to get involved because you've done this before. You just need to join in the conversation on Twitter at #SmallSparkTheory, and we're going to pick one of you. We're going to hook you up with Blair so that you can get a copy of this amazing book. And if it doesn't change your agency's fortunes, then, as Blair said, it means you're doing something wrong.
Then you can return it for a full money back guarantee.
Back guarantee, exactly. Well, that's really generous of you. So thank you for that. Is there a TED Talk or another book or a film or an inspiring person that you would kind of recommend that anybody kind of look up their TED Talk or read their book, or anybody else?
Yeah, if you haven't read David Baker's book, The Business of Expertise, that's a must read. His earlier book too, Managing Right for the First Time, that's for new managers. That's a great book. It's really unlike any other book on management out there, and it's a great book for people who find themselves in a management role for the first time. I think maybe the best general business book that I've read in a long time is Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1, Notes on Startups or Inventing the Future.
Okay. Well, we'll add those onto the blog so people can link through. And yeah, they'll be fantastic.
Hey, can I do a plug of an event that David and I are doing in London?
You are? Well, I was going to talk about that too, because you are coming to London with the DBA.
Yeah, so for 10 years in the United States, David and I once a year ran an event called the New Business Summit, and we haven't done it in, 6 or 7 years or 5 or 6 years. And we're reprising it twice. We're doing it once in London, June 25th and 26th, and you can find information on the DBA's website. And then we're doing it in Sydney, Australia in October through the AGDA, the Australian Graphic Design Association. So I'm pretty sure it's the only time we're going to do this in London. So both David and I are really excited about getting the band back together. Yeah, it's going to be 2 days of just us sparring and the audience paying a lot of money to sit there and listen to us compete with each other.
The final tour. I like it. Yeah. Like the Rolling Stones. Brilliant.
Yeah. Or the Eagles, the Hell Freezes Over tour.
Yeah. Fantastic. Blair, you've been very entertaining and very informative. Thank you so much for your time. And everybody, you can, we're going to provide a link to where you can see details about the book, and we'll provide a link to the DBA site where you can sign up for Blair and David in the summer.
Thank you, Lucy. I've enjoyed this immensely.
So that's it from us today. Join us again next month when we will probably be bringing you the recordings from our live event, which at the time of recording is going to be happening next week at White City Place. So we're going to be recording a couple of episodes there. So we'll see you again in June with one of those special live recordings. See you next time. You have been listening to Small Spark Theory, brought to you by Gunpowder Consulting. Join in the conversation on Twitter at Gunpowder Tweets, #SmallSparkTheory. The podcast is created and hosted by me, Lucy Mann. Our editor is Claire Aban, and our producer is Isabel Jarvis. Music is provided by Juke Deck, available at jukedeck.com. For more information and to download further episodes, head to our blog at gunpowderconsulting.com. And if you like what you hear, head to iTunes and leave us a star.